Thank you so much, ladies, again for being here today. This is like, we're in an unprecedented time right now. Everything seems to be just coming at us like crazy. And I kind of want to know how, when you first heard this news, um, what came to mind? What was the first thing that you thought about when this news came out? Anyone can answer it.
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump in there. And I think the first thing I thought was, here we go again. This isn't new. This isn't necessarily surprising. Working in healthcare, I can say one of the most important parts to me of healthcare that's respectful and equitable is informed consent. And informed consent is not an easy process. It's not something that is or ever should be glossed over. And unfortunately, frequently, especially when working with vulnerable populations who have a unique power dynamic in our white supremacist system, they are not given the due diligence that they need and the true informed consent that is needed before medical procedures. So, part of this was also the public is so shocked, but this is happening all the time throughout our country, unfortunately. And I would say especially around issues of reproductive health.
Thank you. Anybody else wanna?
Yeah, I think I'll second what Danica said in terms of the unfortunate same feeling of not again, and especially in immigration detention centers, and we know at the private prisons, it's unfortunately very common. And the unfortunate reality when it comes to the intersection between immigration and reproductive justice is that when it comes to immigrant women, the solution for these prisons is to deport them so their voices are never heard. And it's a very unfortunate circumstance, but again, I keep saying unfortunate because it's truly grueling, but has happened for a very long time here in the US.
I would like to add to, so everything that you're saying, yes. And just for people that probably don't know exactly what has happened, just a few instances. For example, if we go to the colonial period, we are talking about the indigenous people, and enslaved Black women were assaulted, killed, and denied the rights to the children. So we don't need to go even like a few hundred years back. This just happened just like a few decades back, correct? And if we talk, for example, about how they even like work for Latinx, folks, we need to like also make sure that we are naming how Puerto Rican women were experimented on to develop contraception in the 50s, and how Mexican and Mexican American mothers giving birth in Los Angeles County Hospital in the 70s were manipulated during childbirth to sign consent forms for sterilization with the goal of reducing childbirth among low-income women and Mexican and women of Mexican descent. And like just not too long ago, in the 1990s, 1989 specifically, with welfare reform, this also included racist and coercive family caps as a condition of utilizing public assistance or nutrition programs. So we have seen these things over and over and over. Or how, for example, women right now, during these times, a lot of times they go and be like coerced into long-active contraceptive methods to reduce their sentences. So this is not new to us advocates that we know this, but for you all folks to know about just the few instances that has happening and keeps happening right now. So you all have that information and see how, once again, women of color's bodies are put in danger, are literally like manipulated. Yeah. And what they use, what white supremacy uses, our reproductive health. So we need to see the connections here on like how white supremacy uses our reproductive health for like forced sterilization you know, to ban abortion or like kill women of color at childbirth. So.
I agree 100%. Dorian, what was your reaction?
I mean, my gosh, after listening to my fellow panelists, I'm not really sure how much more there is to add. Those were incredible answers. I mean, the providing of the historical context, the present day experiences, particularly of women of color, where it is insidious. It is sometimes as small and as, you know, minuscule as not being provided the full range of opportunities for your reproductive freedom, all the way to, as was described before, coercive opportunities where only certain things are being paid for by your healthcare provider, right? It is, to me, a situation when I first heard about this where I was not, in fact, surprised, but where I feel like we are at a moment of reckoning where all of these things, all of these systems that really do play together, where all of these systems of injustices that suppress and oppress are all coming to a head. And so for me, this was another example of a state mandated institution that is oppressing through, as Carla mentioned, women's reproductive freedom and reproductive access. And so I was disturbed, not surprised, and really it just felt like another example in this moment of our state not in fact being there to serve justice, to protect, but in fact to further oppress and to terrorize, in fact.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, because I want to, you know, give you some background, I have a disability, and disabled women have also constantly been forced sterilized, you know, and it's still happening. So for me, seeing this news and, you know, realizing that there's still so much work that has to be done and more conversations on what forced sterilization really is for communities of color, and particularly very marginalized groups like disabled women, or people with uteruses, right? Because, you know, the trans community is also a part of this conversation. And migrants of all places have been denied just basic human decency. And in this instant, I was also I was horrified with this news, and I thought, you know what, I need to get a group of amazing people together, and luckily I did, having all of you here, and really having a discussion on this particular issue. And so with that, you know, Carla, you touched in on on the issue of the historical part of what, you know, what this forced sterilization is. But you are the political director of Colorado Organization of Latino Opportunity and Reproductive Rights. As you know, reproductive justice and immigration intersect. In fact, everything actually intersects with reproductive justice. Well, sometimes I feel like there's a disconnection in advocacy when it comes to, you know, collaborating. Do you see a movement happening where these two different issue-based advocacy-led organizers can come together to do work around this?
Thank you so much for that question, because I think that this is a question that also the movement abroad is we're knocking with. Because a lot of, you know, white supremacy wants to divide and conquer.
Yeah.
White supremacy wants to divide our movements so that way they can win and attack us in so many ways, so we are not together fighting this fight. I mean, to this day, they are immigrant rights group that do not want to touch upon reproductive health, that do not want to touch upon talking out loud about abortion access, talking out loud about, for example, how we need to also defund the police, as we are like like right now, also re-knocking with what just happened in the case of Breonna Taylor, correct?
Right.
So what we need, like, and this is why the reproductive justice has been so important, because we even though it's going slow, because we have white supremacy attacking us in many different ways.
Exactly.
We are building a path for other movements to understand these important intersections, correct? So there has been, for example, here in Colorado, a lot of times, like immigrants' rights groups will not talk about LGBTQ liberation, or won't talk about abortion, because Catholics will be like, no, we give you money and you can't talk about LGBTQ issues because that's against God, or we can't talk about abortion because blah, 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 correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then you are like, well, how is these people then, like, are they coming and like supporting us in the work of like creating systems that are going to support women of color in detention centers? Are they creating the systems that are supporting women of color, specifically Black women, to reduce the mortality rate in the country? The day that they show that, then I will be like, of course I understand you. In the meantime, I don't. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that there is a path. We have been building that path, correct? And I think that in this fascist, authoritarian, and white supremacist moment that we are living in right now, groups are re-knocking with that. Groups are like doing the hard work to self-reflect into their identity, because justice is not being served if we are gonna be completely dismantled and not having an analysis that this is all about white supremacy and what white supremacy is doing in our bodies. So I see the space here. I can't tell you honestly that this is all great and dandy and it's working perfect, because it's not. To this day, we are still need to have those conversations, correct, with immigrant rights groups about like, hey, you need to support us, the woman color-led organization, when we are going and talking about maternal health, about abortion later in pregnancy, when it's essential health care in order to protect the life of a pregnant person. So no, the movement is not great. However, I think that during these times, the silver line is that other movements are asking those questions about who exactly they are and who are they serving. Because if they are not serving like those like us fighting, for the lives of women of color, of people of color, pregnant people of color, people that are in reproductive age, to make sure that they decide upon their bodies, well, we are going to be here helping them to push that narrative, because we are all in this together. If they don't kill you, they will kill me.
So thank you. With that, Leonela, you've done a lot of things within immigration. You actually were an immigration activist. You're a lawyer in immigration. What do you see in as a possibility on this situation? Because we saw that today. The Cameroonian detained migrant, Pauline, was actually given humanitarian release. But what does that mean? And what does that mean for her and the rest of the women that currently we know of, and that also we don't know of, that could be in the same situation of her, as they created a monster there by doing this to them. So what is the path for women like them?
Thank you for the question. So in terms of humanitarian release, it's very discretionary in terms of immigration officials. and they're the ones to decide whether or not someone should be granted that. And there's a host of issues why someone could be released. Medical reasons could be one of them, again, in this case. I haven't read exactly what happened with Pauline, but my assumption, just based on experience, is they saw something that she couldn't get the care that she needed, or they couldn't get the care that they needed, thus warranted some release, whether that's maybe with an ankle bracelet, maybe with some form of supervision, or maybe with none at all. Depending again on the situation of the person being released is how it happens. But the path that I see, and I loved how Carla was framing it in terms of there isn't a collaboration, and I definitely agree with that, because again, I think it's particularly speaking with Latin American countries, right? It's very conservative. And it's all about whoever's up there and whether or not we're going to do what's right with our religious beliefs, right? Rather than saying a person who, this is your body, you do as you choose. So I see that not being enough collaboration in that end. And what we can do is really hold these private prisons and holding these detention centers accountable. We know that in all 50 states, DC, and the federal government, it's illegal to be having a sexual conduct of any kind, and correctional officer with any detainee, whether it's quote unquote consensual. Again, the power dynamic, can it really be consensual? My answer is always absolutely not. And so as I was saying, it's like illegal to be having those sexual conduct. Sorry, I should slow down. So let's hold them accountable for it. The problem is that's not happening, right? It's not happening. And we know over and over, as I was saying, that this is nothing new, unfortunately. Yet people have not been held accountable for that. Even here in Rhode Island in 2012 at the YN Detention Center, an officer got fired for having sexual relations with an inmate, right? So again, it's not only about the firing, it's what is the management doing? Right. Where is the public's input? And are you being transparent with the public about what is happening inside? We know that in these detention centers that are, particularly those that are very, very far away, and I'm focusing on detention centers, but in reality, it happens every day, like in our regular prisons. But right now, for conversation's sake, I'm going to be talking about the detention centers. Because they are so far away, because they lack that view of the public, they can get away with a lot of things, and because they're private as well, they can get away with a lot of things. So I don't see that they will be granting humanitarian release for everyone that has gone through this. In my unfortunate, horrible to think about it, but the reality of things is that they'll probably forcibly remove a lot of women or persons who have gone through this just to silence them. And that's the unfortunate reality, but we need to hold people accountable. We need to ensure that there's laws and regulations in place to ensure transparency and access to information from these centers for us to be able to know what is actually occurring in the inside.
Thank you. Dorian, I actually want to ask you, immigrant women are probably one of the most vulnerable populations, and they need to seek reproductive health or health in general. How do you think they're going to feel after such news, right? That's if this happened in the detention center, why should I even bother going to a doctor? Because what if this happens to me and they do something that I don't consent to? So how can this be of an impact into an immigrant's life currently, even if they're not in the detention center right now?
Right. So in thinking about this question, my mind honestly went to what's happening right now in our country. People are dealing with the decision not to prosecute or indict the officers that were involved in Breonna Taylor's murder. And I'm thinking of the extrajudicial killings of Black people around this country and them not being anything new.
Yeah.
And the instances of forced sterilizations or hysterectomies, et cetera, are also not something that's new. And the reproductive tyranny and the harm and the injustice, these are all things that are really built into, unfortunately, our systems. And it's happening outside of just the judicial system, the justice system. It's happening every single day, as you mentioned, when people are going in or even considering going in to seek out care that is outside of just reproductive care, just healthcare generally speaking. And I think it's something that brings me back to what's said many times in the criminal justice space is that we keep our communities safe, right? Like we are the people who direct the safety and the health of our communities. And that's unfortunately what's gonna have to happen here. These systems don't serve us. They were not built to serve us. And they are acting exactly in the way that they were crafted and created to act. And that is the criminal justice system, and that is also our healthcare system. And so for me, when I think about, what are the ways to ensure that, immigrant communities feel safe when they are seeking out healthcare, it's really for us to amplify the work on the ground that is happening in the community, the providers that are creating safe spaces for people, and ensuring that the broader structures that are put in place by our government around health resemble the care, the cultural competency, and the love that happens within the community. So that means that we need to examine every single step of our healthcare systems and ensure that they are centering the people in the communities that they are seeking to serve. So that means, does my provider look like me? Does my provider come from the community that I come from? Does my provider speak the language that I speak? And if they don't, do they have services that are set up to ensure that we are able to communicate if we don't have the same, language? What are the ways that we can replicate what's already good that's happening and make sure that the funding and the resources are poured into the communities that are already doing the good work? And I think until we do that, until we ensure that the people who are on the ground and providing the services in a way that engenders safety and care and commitment to each other, then we're not really going to have a situation where immigrant women feel safe, because they shouldn't. They're not safe, and until we say that explicitly, that our systems are not set up in a way that would make anyone feel safe to engage in them, then we're never going to be able to get to where we need to go. So, it's a long answer, but unfortunately right now, the question is, should people feel safe? And if they are feeling safe, it's because they are getting services in their community with a provider that they trust, and in instances, where they feel seen and heard and valued. And that, unfortunately, most certainly does not happen across the board, and especially when it comes to our government interacting with immigrant women.
Thank you. That's actually very, very true for any experience, right? Not just reproductive justice, not just for immigrants, but in general. And I think that's why I wanted to kind of go to you, Danica. You're a practitioner. I'd love for you to, kind of tie into what Dorian said, but I also want to talk about the doctor, if you could call it that, that practiced these procedures on these women. Turns out he's not board certified. So what does that mean in terms of as a doctor, how can that be okay? And what are the impacts that will get on a woman? Even if she knows what was happening, in this case they don't know, but knowing that this man now did this procedure, not board certified, what is the impact in that for anybody?
Yeah, thank you. So first Dorian really said, very important words and very true and honest words about the system in which we live. And it really is intrinsically broken, and it's not set up for safety for immigrant women. But just adding to that, I think that it's very clear and very important for us to also center it's not set up for safety for women of color, especially Black women in general. And that has so much historical context, and it is on the medical establishment, all practitioners, to truly do their own homework and understand where that comes from and work to do better. And as consumers, as healthcare consumers, as patients, it is on us, especially those of us that are in places of power where we have a voice and we can be safe in the system, to hold entities accountable for fixing the systemic problems that are creating these unsafe systems. So putting money towards diverse hiring, putting money towards funding medical schools, midwifery schools, to be able to offer scholarships to people of color, to encourage them and give them opportunity to be a part of the system. Really kind of implementing changes on the inside to get started and make these systemic changes that are absolutely necessary to instill any amount of trust in our system. So I just wanted to start there first. As far as the physician who was responsible for performing these hysterectomies and unsafe procedures, I just want to be clear that as a doctor, you don't need to be board certified. Actually, just passing your medical boards and being licensed is enough to be able to practice. Mm-hmm. But board certification does then give an additional level of credibility, and it requires more training and more testing. I think this is another example of where we have to look at accountability of an agency. So, you know, for whom did he work? Was this a private practice? How was he contracted through ICE? Where was the oversight? Who was doing reviews of his charts? You know, we don't practice in a bubble. Healthcare is not supposed to operate like that. So I just feel like as this kind of investigation that we hope will be thorough occurs, I think we're going to hear more about where the missteps were. But I, again, want to just really drive home, like, informed consent doesn't require board certification. Informed consent is actually the bare minimum. And hearing that some of these women did not speak English and were not offered appropriate translation services, things like that just make my blood boil. This is 2020. I mean, we have the capabilities to have a translator at the touch of a phone. And so it is just, you know, when it doesn't happen appropriately, it's just from pure laziness and disrespect.
Yeah, it almost seemed like they were intentional in what they were doing. They didn't want to provide this work for them. They didn't want to give them interpreters. They didn't want to let them know what was happening. And they didn't use, you know, medical providers that I'm assuming are already in detention centers. So they used off-site medical.
I think that, you know, I hesitate to make the assumption that it was purposeful to go without a translator, because I know what it's like in health systems too. And I know when people are not properly trained, you know, this is a systemic breakdown. It's not just one person. And I would also just caution kind of thinking about what steps led to this, and like, how deep is this problem actually? Right. And while they might have, for example, they might have a physician or nurse practitioner or somebody on the site for day-to-day things, is the reason they sent people out for surgery because they don't have surgical facilities. That's probably the case. But where is that ICE detention facility? How are they overseeing that decision? What other things are they outsourcing too, right? Does that mean they're outsourcing a whole slew of different medical care? Yeah. And are we going to run into problems there as well? So I just think that this is probably multifactorial.
It's important that we're super happy that at least there's investigation happening with the Hispanic Caucus. You know, Chairman and Congressman Joaquin Castro really took this upon himself to make sure that a thorough investigation is being done. And we don't know everything yet, but we're hopeful that there is going to be more information coming out that will, that will get us the full picture of what happened at these detention centers.
If I can just add for 1 second in regards to that report, I will say that reports have come in the past. This is not the first time it happens, right? And I applaud the congressman for doing so, the senator for doing so, but again, it's nothing new in terms of these abuses that have been happening at these centers. So, and what I really hope to see is what is going to happen when the media stops talking about it, when people stop talking about it. Are we really going to make changes that are meaningful in these facilities? And again, it's in terms of private facilities, it's all about the money. It's all about the Benjamins. So it's like in reality, I know it's a leap to say they don't care, but the way that we've seen it, they really then give the perception that they don't care about the people in there. So I think that we need to think in terms of this report, and I urge Congress to think beyond just simply let's do a reform, or let's do a report. Let's actually do reforms that will prevent this from happening in the first place. No, go ahead.
No, sorry. There totally needs, I agree with you, there totally needs to be accountability. A report that's just put on another shelf is just another layer of like historical, we just have more historical context for the history books. Mm-hmm. That's not what we need to see, and we need to push for accountability at the end of the day.
So what is it just Congress that needs to do something, or can we do something? And with that, I have a question. Is how can people of color get involved locally or nationally to make an impact? How can we get white folks involved in this as well? Because, there's one thing where people are like, oh my God, the outrage is there. But what is outrage without action, right? So what kind of action can we see come from the community, whether it is for people of color? How do we get white folks involved in this movement? Because we can't do it alone. It has to be a collective.
I want to answer that. There's two things here that are big, correct? One is how we all engage, which I can give you a list right now of like organizations that you can be involved, like, correct? And there is another second loaded question that you pose about what people of color can do to engage white folks. I'm going to start with that one because and I'm sure that my colleagues here have an answer for that too, mm-hmm. in a very like our own perspective according to the work that we do, correct? So I guess as a woman of color, as an immigrant person, a lot of times, honestly, I feel already tired to prove my humanity to white folks. And I don't do it. I don't engage because I am tired. I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted every day. So what I can do though, according to my capacity, my emotional and mental capacity, because I don't think that we need to tell people of color that they like go ahead and engage with white folks. We shouldn't tell that. We can tell like whatever is your capacity, engage with white folks or the movement in itself, correct? Mm-hmm. Because I do it in my work because I have to. I'm a policy director. Everything is white, Yeah. So I do it, and it's tiring because it happens to be mostly me that brings up like the perspective of people of color in the table. Yeah. And it kind of crushes my soul. So just to put it out there, correct? And what we can do, you know, a lot of times it also feels for us so daunting on us, correct? Like so much going on at the federal level, all the things that are happening to us. Then, for example, I'm in Colorado, but then this happening in Georgia. We also are dealing with things in the detention center here in Colorado, in Aurora, which the conditions were awful. They didn't even allow people to go, like, for example, legislators to go and see what's happening there. We needed to pass a law to do that because, like our colleague says, that they are private detention centers. They can do whatever the hell they want, correct? So I would actually highly recommend, if you are the type of person that has the capacity, the emotional capacity to engage at the national level. So there are amazing like organizations like Close the Camps, that US, No More Deportations.com, you know, like organizations like that, or United We Dream, correct? So we can engage that level. I would say though, go to your local organizations, engage locally. Mm-hmm. That's the most impact that we can do. Find out of your immigrants' rights organizations in your state. In, like, maybe you live in the city where there is a detention center. Find out what are the actions that are happening there. Here in Denver, we have a strong Abolish ICE movement. Like they do every day. They are outside of the detention center. Actually, there has been arrests of people that were protesting peacefully outside of the detention center. So there is a big thing right now with the Denver police because peaceful protesters have been detained when there is white supremacists literally like out there harassing people of color here in Denver, and no one does anything there. Correct? So again, go locally. Find out who is your local immigration rights organization so you can be active part of this. And once again, you know, if you have the capacity, if you feel that you have the emotional capacity and the mental capacity to explain things to white folks, great. But if not, you don't need to do it. We don't need to explain our humanity to those who don't want to understand. And engage other people of color in the fight. Engage your mama, your papa, your tío, your tia, your primo, your prima, you know, like engage your family, engage your friends, engage the people that look like you, because guess what? I'm sure that they had experiences, the same experiences that you had, or similar experiences. So we can all bring that awareness. And like Dorian said, build the systems outside of the systems.
Yeah.
Because the systems that are put right now in place are not freaking working for us. Those systems are killing us. So let's create something beautiful for our communities.
It's very tiring. I could attest to that. It's very tiring to continue to ask people to listen to us or to bring our perspective to the table, and most times they don't listen, right? So what is the point? I agree that we need to, you know, galvanize our own communities and make sure that we center our own voices, bring that table, bring those chairs, and like we can make the same exact noise. I know, Leonela, you had a question, right?
More of an addition of things.
Yeah.
And it's not only for people of color, because I definitely agree in terms of it's not our responsibility to teach others, because we live in the 21st century. We have the technologies, we have books, we have everything you could possibly need. Google. That should you want to learn about what has happened, you can. In a click of a button, just as fast as you can send a tweet, you can learn about what's happening out there. So I do agree that it's not, the onus should not be on people of color to teach others or be targeted to teach others in terms of what is happening, or even to explain what's happening, again, because, well, Google.
We have Google.
What's the answer to every question when you don't know? Google it. So again, you can Google. But the thing that I, joking aside, that I really wanted to bring in terms of bringing people to the fold and what are things that you can do, definitely engage in your local organizations. national organizations if you can. In terms of immigrant rights, right? Some immigrants are able to get bond, which is similar to bail if everyone has dealt with that or has heard of it, right? So it's similar to bail. People are currently in prison or in detention centers because they are unable to pay their bond. And it could be anything from $800 to $1,500. And if they come up with the money, again, they can put on some restrictions in terms of whether ankle bracelets or other terms of monitoring that person. But there's a lot of organizations out there that are pulling together bond fund for folks. So if you have I know it's a difficult time with COVID, but if you do have the funds for it, then, look up some reputable organizations and donate to them, because again, folks are in prison or in detention centers because they are poor, because they are low income, not because necessarily they've been found of anything. Again, just like a regular lack of criminal justice system, like lack of justice, but the criminal justice system, we need a new name for that. People are in jail because they're poor. We're criminalizing poverty. So if you have the ability, even $5, $10, $20 that you can give to one of those organizations to help at least one person get out, then that's also something big that you can do to kind of help out in the situation.
I would add just one thing very quickly. So I agree with what Carla said. Like, if you don't care about me dying, then you're not going to care about my reproductive choices or whether I vote or like any of those things, right? Like, if you can't even care about me dying, you're not going to care about anything else. Right. But what I will say is that I make a point not to try to convince anyone, but when I talk about issues, I make them about everything. So if I'm talking about criminal justice, I'm talking about gender justice. If I'm talking about gender justice, I'm talking about racial justice. If I'm talking about racial justice, I'm talking about immigration justice. That's right. So that is the way that I try to, do the work without asking or begging someone to recognize my humanity. I put all of it out there and say that all of these things are connected, and to recognize one, you have to recognize all.
I think that is extremely important, because many times we see even in our own communities, even in the communities of color, when we're doing work, sometimes we forget, right, that there's things that intersect with everything. And so if we're going to talk about one issue, we need to add how it impacts everything else. How, reproductive justice is an issue with immigration, with disability justice, with environmental justice, with poverty, with everything you can think of. It all intersects. So it's important to make sure that we don't leave one out, because it all belongs together. These conversations, this work, the movement, it's together. It's not like, oh, I'm working on reproductive justice, but forget it, I'm not working on immigration, or I'm not working on health. And since I talk about health, I don't know that you've heard in, April, in the Latino shows, there was a video that popped up that also came out and was a little viral. And it was a video of women that were detained in that same detention center. They were talking about their conditions of COVID-19. Some of them were sick. Some of them were, afraid to get sick. There were about 50 people there, and they said, we don't get masks. We don't get, anything in terms of the regulations that were put by the CDC. Nobody's separate. Nobody's 6 feet distance. There's no nothing, no sanitizers, nothing that we can feel comfortable and safe in. And I asked Dorian and I asked Danica, who you both of you work a lot in health, and everyone can chime in if they'd like to. But how can we already know what's happening right now? It's already an atrocity, but this is another problem that we see across the board when it comes to incarceration, when it comes to immigration. How can we make noise for people to be safer, and for the government to take this as an important move that they have to do. We need to make sure everyone is safe, including migrant women and men. So what do you think needs to be done?
So I'll hop in. I think that first it goes back to accountability. Unfortunately, many of these places are run by private corporations. And I think that limits the oversight that happens on a state or federal level, which is shameful. And, in terms of what we can do, I think, again, it is speaking up, lending your voice, running for office, writing letters to your senators and representatives. It might feel like something small or that it won't make a big impact, but if we are all being the voices for the people that don't have them right now, I think that can make a dramatic difference.
I'm going to slightly be negative and say that when we're talking about these systems, we're talking about power and we're talking about money. Those are the two things that these people care about. They don't care about individuals. They don't care about the people there. They don't care about anything. So power and money. And so if we're talking about even private institutions, they are still being federally funded, right? If they are housing people based on immigration charges, issues, et cetera. And so we have to follow the money. If we threaten the money in any way, they will get themselves into compliance. They don't feel like they have to comply because what's the threat right now, right? Like who's really, as Danica said, who is holding them accountable? And so we need the people who have the power to hold them accountable and hold those purse strings to feel like there is something at risk if they do not act. One of my favorite, phrases from Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. So these people have the power and we have to demand that they are either going to act or that we're going to hold them accountable in the next general election because they want to hold on to their power, and those places, those corporations want to hold on to their money. And so there has to be a real threat to both of those things in order for there to be movement in compliance and trying to ensure the safety of the people that are being held there.
But I'll say also that you can't then, and following that logic, you can't have legislators that are bought by these prisons, right? You need legislators who are not going to take the funds that these fancy dinners or these fancy whatever and just to get elected or continue on their seats. So we need elected officials who are not bound and who are not just straight up bought by these corporations, because the reality of the problem is not the legislators are not going to hold them accountable if they know that so-and-so corporation is going to send them a $50,000 check, or every year they get to go to a gala, or X, Y, and Z, whatever it is that they get, right? So we need to go out in numbers and vote like your life depends on it, because the reality is it does, and the vote does matter. And unfortunately, because they've suppressed it for so long, we don't go out and vote. So I think that there's a educational component there too, but we just need legislators who are not bought in order to make that happen. So I 100% agree with you on that one.
So I mean, we only have like 6 minutes, but I wanna know, I want to know so much. Like, it's like I have so many questions and I can't give you all of them. But let's talk about what we can do to help these women currently that are being violated. Like, this is a real human rights violation. What can we do to make sure that people know that this is not okay, that people can be engaged in making noise and making sure that, this has to stop? And so what can we do?
Very briefly, I know that we have 5 minutes right now. So once again, I love, Leonela, like what you said about being engaged. Get, like right now, if we are talking about politically, let's all get engaged. like we need to provide information to our communities about legislators. Who are the ones that are with us? Who are the ones that are going to be fighting for us? Because let me tell you, I know legislators here in Colorado that they say they are all for the fight, and then at the end of the day, they vote for like amendments that are bad for our communities, and that includes people of color. So let's be real here, because we need to make sure that we are looking to legislators that are going to be with us at every second and every step of like when we are pushing for policies, because even people of color a lot of times like messed up with our communities. So let's start by with that in like politically. Second, we need to start making sure that those families right now are getting the reparations that they need. Like that's what I say. It is important to make sure that we are engaging in with our local immigration rights organizations, because they are the ones that know what's happening. They are the ones that are providing assistance to their families for reparations. Probably it's going to be like a legal fund, so they can like, you know, file a lawsuit and all these things. So need to start looking into that. And in the personal level, we need to talk about these issues. Just because you are tired of hearing in that day, guess what? These people are already like suffering in their bodies, and we can be one of them. That doesn't mean that we are safe. We can live right now our homes, and a white supremacist can kill us, and no one wants to talk about that. Yes, it is traumatic. Yes, we need to make sure that we are creating spaces for our own healing during these times. But guess what? Not talking about those injustices are making things worse. So like make sure that you're talking about that. Make sure that you are loud about that, because this is not gonna go away. And even if we vote this year, there is a big probability that could also be fraud, and this administration keeps continue coming. So make sure that we are all working together in doing these things for our communities.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I'll just say quickly that we all need to be Don Wooden, right? Like we all need to be the person who puts something at risk at stake and speaks up when we're witnessing atrocities, to not be complicit. So in addition to everything that Carla said, which I +1 times 1,000, I also think that we need to really say out loud the courage that it took for this woman to be the person who brought these issues to light, and that we every single day witness injustices, and that we have a responsibility every single day, as exhausting as it is, because I know it is exhausting. Yeah, I know, but we have a responsibility to, you know, to speak on it, to say these things out loud. And then for me, unless we are explicit about the injustice, we can't hold people accountable. So that's all I'll add to what Carla already outlined for us, that we all need to be done.
I think I'll add to that also my 2 cents in terms of we need to make sure that we do protect the whistleblowers as well. And again, not just that while the media is going on and why the hype of everything is happening, when the lights are turned off and the noise turns down, what is happening to this person in the long run? How are their life impacted, and are we protecting them to make sure that they can continue on after they did the right thing? Because we've seen that what happens is that they come out, they're protected in the beginning, and then they're like, oh, well, it's been fun. So we need to make sure that we protect the whistleblowers throughout this, and that they just get what they need in terms of everything, whether it's economic, whether it's just safety, that we do protect them.
Yeah.
Sorry, one more thing. Sorry, that we have to talk about the policies and the institutions, right? So also outside of everything that Carla said, and Leonela and me, I would also say that when we're talking about who is making the decisions around funding for these institutions, who is making decisions around who is directing them, who is making decisions about what direction they are going in, we're talking about elected officials at every single step, right? And so we have power as people who elect these elected officials to have control over the direction of these institutions, or whether or not they even exist to begin with, right? So if we're talking about ICE abolition, like who's making these decisions? Are these people that are elected by us, and what perspectives are they taking into the conversations that they're having in Congress? So I would also say that we have power and control over all of these levels of the institutions, and that our vote, decides whether or not we're complicit in the way things are right now, or if we want things to change.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And yeah, just to summarize, vote, 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 vote. Vote like your life depends on it, because it truly, absolutely does.
Yeah, thank you. I want to close by having you guys say just one short thing directly to the community of immigrant, migrant women, and to Dawn Wooten, who was a strong Black woman who, she was the whistleblower, and like Yanela says, we need to protect her. So quickly, what message do you have for the community and for Dawn?
I can start.
Yeah.
I think sorry. I think for me, I will say to Dawn directly, thank you for being so strong and putting yourself out there, because it's not an easy thing to come out and risk your own livelihood in order to do what's right. And to those women that are in there, I will say to you, we hear you, we're here, and we're gonna fight for you. So don't give up, just hold on tight, because we are here.
Similarly, I would share my thanks to Dawn. She, as a fellow healthcare provider working in the system, it is so hard to buck the system and do the right thing. The system is actually very much centered in silencing whistleblowers, and there's a whole culture in the medical establishment that is about just keep on keeping on and put your head down and do the work. So I'm so grateful for her strength and her courage in doing that. And to the people in these detention centers, especially the women who are at such risk of this patriarchal model that's existing, and feel probably pretty powerless, I would say that we all need to do better, and we will do better at protecting them from the outside.
So Dawn, as an immigrant woman from Peru, I just can't thank enough for the solidarity that we have shown here among women of color. Like a Black woman defending our lives right now. I don't know who else could it have done. So thank you for doing the hard work of stepping up and saving lives. And to the, women in detention centers, nosotros estamos aquí, estamos luchando para ti, por tu vida, estamos aquí para ustedes, y ustedes, sus vidas, nosotros conocemos, y estamos haciendo todo lo posible para poder ayudarlas. So, hang in there, estamos aquí por ustedes.
How can anyone follow any of these things up? So, I mean, Dawn, I hope that she's taking time to restore and time to really take some time to herself after, I'm sure, the onslaught that she experienced being the center of this. And I would say to the women and people who are being held really across the country, and particularly in this facility in Georgia, that, I am not an immigrant. I am not someone who's ever been held in a facility. And for me, I think it's powerful that I didn't have to have had any of those experiences to see the injustice in what's happening here. And I think that is the powerful connection, that I don't have to have lived the experiences that you've lived to be inspired by and driven to act based on the experiences that you are having. So there are many people like me out here who care about what is happening to you, who understand that you shouldn't be there in the first place, and that if you are being held there, at the very least, you should be treated with dignity, respect, and humanity. So We're all fighting on the outside, and hopefully you all will be out and in your communities instead of locked away unjustifiably.
So I want to thank Carla, Danica, Dorian, Leonela. I want to thank the Women's Project, K9 Walk, the National Women's Law Center for, for helping us put this together. But, I also want to give a big, big thank you to Julia and to Letitia, because you also made this conversation a inclusive one for people with disabilities. And being here today, I want to just thank you, all of you, for this conversation. I hope that people see the importance of fighting this fight, not stopping. It's not going to end today. It's not ending tomorrow, but we can hope that it will get better. For those that are seeing this, 2020 is an election season. I really want you to take an opportunity to learn about the people that are going to be elected, the folks that are able to make changes in policy, and vote. Vote, 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 because we need you to help us move this country forward and help stop some of these injustices, because they're not all going to stop. But we want to do step by step the changes that needs to be done so that we can have a more equitable world and a more equitable America. So with that, vote, and also do the census, because it's not over yet. So the census is very important. With that, I want to thank everyone again. Thank you so much, every single one of you, for making this conversation the most impactful. And as a Latina myself, as a disabled woman, as a first generation Latina, it is really important to see, to hear, and to talk about these issues and center our own people. So again, thank you. I appreciate all of you, and I look forward to working with you in this fight.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Stephanie, thank you. Thank you,
Bring
everyone.
us together. Have a good one.
Okay, so I stopped the live feed. Thank you so much, ladies. I really appreciate it. Dorian had to go because she has another meeting, and we went a little overboard. So I want to thank you all again so much. Please feel free to share this video in your networks. And again, thank you so much. Oh wait, she's back. Let me see. Okay, she is back. Yeah, I think she might have got kicked out. Sorry.
Sorry.
Technology.
I have a quick question in regards to the video. Since we had the interpreters come, is there a way to put and I see that it's